and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 26. I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is the author of a phenomenal, full of music novel called School of Velocity. Hello, Eric Beck Rubin.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you for the invitation.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. If I kind of hold my hands to the side of my head and I just look to a very specific place, I'm just doing fine. How about yourself?
I'm okay, yeah, I'm good. I'm going to ask first, if you don't mind, about your PhD.
Okay, well, how much do you want to know?
Well, I know it was about the Holocaust, but, you tell us what you want to.
Okay, so I've always been interested in the way that history is transmitted through art, whether that's fiction, more recently, works of architecture, memorials, visual art, any kind. I'm interested in the way that what art does to our history. So yes, you did mention that the historical subject is the Holocaust, and the PhD looked at the different ways that novelists had represented, interpreted that subject, those events. It's strange to use those nouns, but that's what you sort of get used to when you're in it. So what I eventually went to do is I looked at the way three specific writers had written about the Holocaust. The first one was Imre Kertész, who was about 14 years old when he was deported from Budapest to the camps. He's what I call a witness, pretty self-explanatory. The second was Georges Perec, who was in hiding in what was called the non-occupied zone of France. It was still a very dangerous place to be. He's what I called an indirect witness. The difference between the two, witness and indirect witness, is that witness actually sees and experiences the subject that becomes really the center of his or her life. For the indirect witness, those events, that subject, it's still the center of their life, but they don't ever see it or witness it firsthand, always at a remove. And then the third is a generation later. The novel I chose was Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Lethem, and I was interested in what happens a generation after those writers. How is this subject written about? Does fiction broaden its capacity? Does it become more radical? Or, as it turns out, does it become more conservative? Does it become more careful about what it represents and how it represents it? And that was the subject. That's what I wrote about. And I was quite surprised to find that fiction, rather than opening up this field, actually closed it down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. It's a difficult subject.
It was something I really wanted to do, something I cared a lot about, something I thought was important. It was really important to me to study the subject and to learn something about it and to say something about it.
I originally was going to ask you, are you musical? Because obviously this book is full of music. And we're on video and you've got a music score behind you. So instead I'm going to ask, what do you play?
I learned a lot of piano and I went to what's called Grade 10 in the Royal Conservatory here, which is sort of a program for, well, actually, if I'm being honest, it's a program for deadening your musical instincts. But that's another subject altogether. I love music, like so many people, and I enjoy all kinds, and I play almost exclusively classical music. That's what I'm capable of. But I'm not the most musical person in the sense that I have two brothers, and one of them, despite not practicing half as much as I did, when he sat down at the bench, wow, it sounded much, much better than anything I could produce. So I would say I love music. I would say I'm musical, but by no means outstanding in that sense at all. No, not at all. It's just a love that brought all that music into the book.
Mm-hmm. Favorite classical musician?
I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and we listen to all kinds of stuff. But one of the things I wanted her to learn was classical music. And so from time to time, I'll ask her what she wants to listen to. And she has an incredible memory, and she'll come up with Liszt or Chopin or Schubert. And, whatever she says most recently, that's what I'm most into.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer to the question. Obviously, as I expect listeners can tell if they haven't come across your work before, this is very relevant, this music, to the novel. So Eric's novel, School of Velocity. Jan is a musician. He's ready to go on stage. He starts feeling anxious, let's put it that way, and we'll talk about the reality of it later on. And he gets on stage and he just can't do it. He stops, and then we go back to a friend who has influenced his life. So before we get into the reading, I know that reviews mention The Great Gatsby. And there is a sort of flavour, I think, to the book of that. Is there anything in this?
There are a lot of books that influenced me, a lot of books I stole from. That was never one that I stole from or influenced me, but I think it speaks to the fact that these kinds of friendships, that really is the subject of the book, the friendship between these two boys, although the story in School of Velocity takes on a very specific flavor, if that's not too lascivious sounding a word, the story of close friendship between men, and especially close friendships where one seems to be the alpha and the other the beta, they are all over the place in literature. So yeah, I was thinking that makes sense, that comparison, although it was nothing I intended, although as I said previously, there are all kinds of other sources that I used and took from. But yeah, I mean, I accept that. Who doesn't want to be compared to such an amazing, amazing book?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. And there is something there, I think. And if there gets more people reading your book, that's good. Why the Netherlands for your story?
I've written something subsequently. I know enough about myself to know that I try to make up as very few things as possible when I'm writing. There's always stuff that you're going to have to make up. A work of art has so many more rules than a work of history or nonfiction, but I try to make up as few things as possible. So the Netherlands came up because this story came to me when I was in the Netherlands. Well, I was in a town called Vlijmen. I was studying German in a town called Vught. Both of those places are in the book. And an old friend of mine, about a generation older than me, said, "Oh, I have a friend. He's living in Maastricht. Why don't you see him?" And I say, "Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I have a weekend. Why don't I go to Maastricht and visit your friend?" And my friend said to me, "Well, this person was really influential to me when I was growing up. He was a year older than me. He really inducted me in all kinds of different things as I was getting into university. He was sort of the bright shining star of our group, and he just influenced me a great deal." So I didn't ask him anymore. And then I went to Maastricht for this weekend and met up with this other friend. Anyone who's read School of Velocity will start to see the adumbrations of one story and the other begin to touch. But I went to see this old friend who had been so influential, so important in my friend's life, and we had a nice day out, and I spent the night at his place. And that's where the story came about, because in stepping into this old friend's apartment, what I saw was sort of, and I'm not saying this in any judgmental sense, I'm saying this in a literal sense, a pathetic, sort of run-down version of my friend's apartment. All the same things that my friend liked, this old friend had, but in a kind of tattered sense. He had a piano, but the piano keys were missing and the thing sounded awful. He had art on the wall, but the frames were damaged. The arts were, shitty reproductions. It was all kind of a carbon copy of my friend's apartment. And all of a sudden I saw how the dynamic between these two had been completely reversed over time. And that's what started the story for me. That's what started it.
Does a friend know about your novel?
Yes, between these two friends I'm referring to, one of whom was named Jan and the other one of whom was named Dirk. Jan knows about the book. Dirk might too, I'm not quite sure. But it's not their story that fills their pages. It's their dynamic and their reversal that got me started. That's the thing that they certainly noticed. And my friend Jan was very kind. He is Dutch, and he just corrected me a few things on the local customs. Didn't say anything else.
Mm-hmm. Shall we have the first of those two readings you've picked for us?
Sure. So the two friends are Jan and Dirk. Jan is the narrator. Dirk is his friend. Dirk is the shooting star. Dirk is the hero of Jan's life, or so Jan thinks. And they're becoming closer as friends, and the sort of big leap is when Dirk invites Jan to his place for Christmas with his family, and Jan senses that he's about to be inducted into the inner world of Dirk. So that's the first reading, their first Christmas together. And it's Jan narrating in first person. When the car pulled up at the dead-end street in front of Dirk's, I checked myself briefly in the reflection of the windshield. My mother handed me a wrapped box of chocolates. For Dirk's parents, she said, not Dirk. She probably added something else, but I wasn't paying attention. I'd caught sight of the kitchen, so brightly lit through the bay window, and was looking at the action inside. Though I hadn't met most of the people there, I felt I knew who they were from Dirk's descriptions. There were Dirk's parents, Wim and Cornelia, his older brother, his grandmother, who drank everyone's wine when they weren't looking, and another couple, his parents' age, who must have been their regular Christmas guests, the Polhamases, all crowded around the island, drinking, prepping food, talking, gesturing, casual, belonging. I kissed my mother goodbye, crossed the street, and skipped up the red brick steps to the glass vestibules in front of the house. The smell of sugar and brandy thickened the air. I rang the doorbell and listened. There was a pause in the noise from the kitchen, the shuffling of feet on tile, the scrape of the lock, and the turn of the brass doorknob. The door opened, letting out more brandy and sugar and the buttery smell of pie crust. I saw an oversized Christmas tree, which had taken over the living room. I heard jazz playing loudly. A voice like and unlike Dirk's, which must have been his brother's, was explaining something about Athenian history. And before me, in the doorway, was Dirk's mother, Cornelia. Master Jan has graced us with his presence, she said. The little pianist has arrived. This was a cue for footsteps to come galloping down the stairs and socks to slide across the living room's whacked hardwood. Dirk, on the edge of control, came crashing into me, grabbing onto me not to fall. Then he stood up, put his arm around my shoulder, and without missing a beat said, I believe you mean masturbator, Jan, the little penis. His mother threw her head back and laughed silently, a hand hanging in midair. Dirk imitated her, hanging his hand in midair. After introductions and aperitif, everyone moved to the dining room, where throughout dinner, Dirk put on a bravura performance of Dirkness, and the entire family showed their unlimited adoration of everything he did. His father beamed, Granny stroked the back of his hand. But Polhamus' niece, who arrived late and sat next to Dirk's brother, giggled at every one of Dirk's dirty punchlines. All of this was played around a table packed with food, so much and so rich, and under a giant painting of a dog sleeping on a lush bed of purple grass. An early Scholte, I'd been told. Time was only called when Wim, at the head of the table, unbuckled his belt, unbuttoned his fly, hung his head, and closed his eyes. By that point, Granny had been led to a guest room at the back of the house. The Polhamuses had left, and Dirk's brother and the Polhamus' niece had gone off somewhere. You two boys go to the tree, Cornelia said in a wobbly voice. I'll manage the plates. I stumbled to the living room couch. Dirk, riding another of his second winds, threw his father's old newspapers into the low-burning fire and grabbed hold of a poker. I rested my eyes for a moment, only to be hit on the head by a flying object. Vorsicht, to freeze, Dirk said, unwrapping the gift that landed on the couch next to me, the gift I'd brought. And what could this be? It could be for your parents, I said. That's just going to make them taste better, old man. Dirk rubbed his hands and opened the box, which contained dozens of individually wrapped chocolates set in a grid. He pulled out chocolates at random, unwrapped them, took small bites from each, then rewrapped the uneaten portions and placed them back in the box. Funny, he said, they all taste the same. He snapped the box shut and threw it aside, knocking other presents and tinsel dangerously close to the fire. Feel like ducking upstairs, he said, and watching an interesting mature video. I looked into the kitchen. Your mother's right there, I hissed. She can probably hear us. Good point, DeFries. It'd be rude not to extend the invitation. Dirk cackled at his own joke, drew a breath, and bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. I sprang to my feet and raced after him. I'm going to beat you up, DeFries, Dirk called back at me, not caring who heard.
So, apart from the obvious look at the relationship there, which I think we'll get onto in a minute, I was reading the book and I got to quite a way past this bit, and I started to think, hang on a minute. You say about the first person narrative that this is, and you don't have much dialogue from other people that aren't Dirk. You know, I noticed with Lena, she doesn't get much of a look in dialogue-wise for quite a while. Was this something that you had considered doing throughout?
That's something, again, I spoke earlier about what you intend and what the results are, and the gap between them. What you're saying to me, if I was just listening, not having written or detaching myself as a writer, I'd say, well, that's because Jan's obsessed with Dirk. Mm-hmm. Jan is absolutely obsessed with him. And the big book that I loved, that I thought about often while I was reading this, was A Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford. When I read that book, it took me a very long time to realize, A, and spoiler alert, the narrator is completely nuts, and B, that he's absolutely obsessed with, I think the character's name is Ashburnham. He's obsessed with him. Same with Jan. Jan really only hears Dirk's voice. As you put it, it's quite poetic that the reader also only hears Dirk's voice because it's Jan telling the story and he's telling what he hears. Again, that's not something I actually intended. It's just Dirk takes up all the room in Jan's mind. All the room.
That sounds subconsciously then. You're getting into the character and everything like that.
Oh, subconsciously, absolutely. This is, again, a little bit to the side, but it's a fairly short novel. And one of the challenges I faced when I was trying to find an agent, when the agents were trying to find publishers, is that it was short. And they really wanted other things to be, well, I'm going to use the word inflated. They wanted other characters to take up bigger room, all these other things. To me, I couldn't do that. In the end, didn't have to do that. I was fortunate, because to stay true to the narrator's story, to stay true to Jan's story, it has to be completely zeroed in on Dirk. And no matter how far he ranges, no matter who else is in his life, that's the voice he hears. That's the person who's next to him, whether or not he's actually next to him.
Mm-hmm. Lowly reader completely agrees with that. It works wonderfully. I think it's worth noting.
Did you say lowly reader?
Yeah, I'm a lowly reader.
No, no.
You're the writer, so you know.
No, absolutely not. No, I heard a really good expression. Martin Amis said it, but he was quoting someone. I can't remember who he was quoting. He said it really well. He said, reading and writing are the same thing. And I agree. You know, when you're writing something, you're acting as a reader. And when you're really into a book, you're acting as a writer as well. So no, there's no hierarchy there. No, banish the thought.
The one thing I did want to note there is you said about, you know, publishers and industry people wondering about how you'd written it and bringing characters in further. I want to note to listeners that in the UK at least, this book was picked up by Pushkin Press and by their One imprint, which is the one book that they publish in that year. So that's just to show you how much this book has been thought of. We've got to talk about the classical music further, you know, further than your own interest. How did you go about choosing the classical music that's played and discussed by Jan throughout the book?
Well, I'll just say very quickly, I loved Pushkin Press. They were amazing. So I was a fan of theirs before they even contacted the agent and considered publishing the book, and to meet the people there, it was such a privilege. I loved it. So your question was about classical music, how it made its way into the book, pardon me? Is that correct?
Yes.
You know, there's the narrator, there's the protagonist. In the Prayer for Owen Meany, there's Johnny Wheelwright who tells the story, but it's called A Prayer for Owen Meany for a reason. You know, Owen Meany is the illuminating element of the book, and Jan is the illuminating element. I think there's somewhere he's described as a speck of yeast that leavens the whole, and that's who he is. So he's the son. He's an actor, or he's a budding actor. He's an acting student. He's in drama, and he loves funk and soul, loves it. So in order to have a narrator who contrasted with him, I mean, what's more opposite funk and soul than classical music? And there are always going to be people who say Mozart was the first jazz artist, but that's not in the sense. I mean, the world of funk and soul is about sex. It's alive. You dance. It just gets you right at your heart. And classical music can do all those things, but at least today it's something you have to induct yourself into, I think. It's something you have to study. And of course, the study really pays off because it is the most incredible music you can listen to, at least I think. But the reason classical music is there is to provide a contrast to the music that Dirk listens to, the music that Dirk loves. And it's not just his music, really, it's his attitude, it's his life. He is a very funky individual. So I needed somebody who contrasted with that. And that's why Dirk is, you know, somebody who sits behind the piano, practices, his life is pretty lonely. He's the opposite of a drama student. He's the opposite of drama, or at least he appears to be on the surface.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Looking into the title, School of Velocity, which is a selection of pieces by Czerny, I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
You could say that it's unstable in the right hand and a bit stable in the left, and then they switch back and forward. Can you talk about your choice for the music, your use of it as the title, and in the context of your characters?
Well, so there are a few things. I mean, first of all, School of Velocity. Velocity, that's Dirk. You know, Dirk is speed. Dirk is working at a very high rate in his life. He basically speeds up Jan's life. You know, Jan's sort of in a small town. He is a small world. He's an accompanist when he becomes professional, and Dirk is the motor. You know, he's driving everything. So just that word velocity and Dirk is just almost synonymous. As to the pieces themselves, yeah, they are pieces, but they are really finger exercises. They're exercises to get your fingers warm and moving and working fast. And your goal as a student learning them is to play them faster and faster and faster and faster. So those are the two most apparent, at least to me, reasons for the title, and the reason that that piece was chosen to represent the book itself. And they're, in a sense, they're young, and in a sense, they're practicing at life. And then when life comes, Jan's on his own, and he's sort of graduated from the school that Dirk has inducted him into. And instead of being in control and learning all these things, he totally flies off the keyboard. Although in a very controlled fashion that he doesn't quite understand is happening until it's too late.
Risking spoilers here, I suppose, but I think your reading may have given listeners an idea that this might come up. Do you see Jan and Dirk as having loved each other?
100%. Now, love's a very broad term. And is there admiration in love? Yes. Appreciation? Yes. Jealousy? Yes. Hatred? Yes. You don't estrange yourself from someone that you don't love. You don't totally shut them out if you don't need to. Yeah, they loved each other, but love in the most Catholic sense, in the most general and broad sense. Yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming you asked because you think the same.
I think so, yeah.
Think so?
It was interesting to get obviously I'm interested in getting your answer, because obviously it's never actually literally said. You could interpret it differently, perhaps, maybe, but obviously there's so much depth to it and it's complex. Really, I just wanted to know what you think. No, I think definitely, yeah. Shall we have that second reading?
Okay, sure. So the first reading was about their first Christmas and Jan being inducted into their house, and this comes a few years later. This is the first Christmas after each has parted for university. Jan has gone to Maastricht and Dirk has gone to America. And Jan's excited. He's looking forward to their next meeting. And of course, it's going to be on Christmas when Dirk comes home, and Jan's come home a little bit early. He's waiting for him, so I'll just jump into it. Like everyone else on campus, I left Maastricht on December 23rd. I took the late afternoon intercity train, direction Amsterdam Centraal. It was the local, and more people were getting out than coming in. Soon I was the last person in my car. I moved next to the window and started searching the night sky for the vapor trails left by passing airplanes. As the train made its way into the familiar flat countryside, I followed the double lines as they lit up and faded in the large black bowl above. It was possible Dirk was on one of those planes, gliding over the fingers of land that stretched into the sea, heading towards the bank of clouds that hover permanently above Amsterdam. As soon as I could see Den Bosch, that's the town where Dirk lives, the nearest station to Vlijmen, that's where Jan lives, my head began cycling through two pieces: Schubert's Sonata 21 in B flat and Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C sharp minor. I had started practicing them at the beginning of the month and had played them so often that they were lodged in my brain, playing themselves regardless of whether or not I was in front of a keyboard. The two pieces were natural opposites. The Schubert had the most beautiful opening of any piece I had played, as if the notes were balanced on the thinnest, most fragile wire. They ascend and descend, but every time you think the melody will break away, it returns to level. A build-up to forte, a return to mezzo. The introspective passages of pianissimo never dwelling long enough to grow melancholy. Underneath all that, a regular pulse of octaves and the bass clef gives the piece a steady and abiding feeling of hope. The Rachmaninoff C sharp, on the other hand, is a pack of limbs falling spectacularly down a flight of stairs, a tumbling that builds up to an explosion of chords, broken and solid, shooting up and sliding down octaves. The final section repeats the opening by doubling up the chords. Left and right hand cross over each other. The tempo increases until runs of notes crash in waves running crosswise. Dirk would love the Rachmaninoff. If he came to the house to pick me up or drop me off, I would definitely play it for him. The train got in around 8. The taxi quickly slipped out of Den Bosch and onto the quiet A2. A lining of hoarfrost covered the land, starting from the tall plants and reeds on the banks of the canal and spreading past the fields into the forests. Root, trunk, branch, needle, soil, furrow, blade. All of it from Den Bosch to Vlijmen, skinned in ice. One push, I imagined, and I could skate from one to the other. In the morning, I practiced on the old Grotrian upright, mostly to impress my parents. My father sat on the couch next to the piano and, for old time's sake, brought his work with him and made passing comments on my playing. When I took a break from my pieces, I stretched my fingers with technical exercises, scales and formulas, chords broken and solid, arpeggios, major, minor. When I ran out of permutations, I took out Czerny's School of Velocity and opened to a random page. I used the metronome to work my way through the tempi, andante, moderato, allegro, presto, prestissimo, faster and faster, turning the drizzle of notes into a thunderstorm. A spastically bravura performance. With nothing more to show and believing that Czerny might be irritating my father, I spent the afternoon fitting puzzle pieces with my mother and cracking the spine of the Glenn Gould biography that had been assigned reading. Towards evening, I allowed myself to look at my watch. Christmas dinner was 24 hours away, less if you counted aperitif and truffle rolling. The obvious course of action would have been to pick up a phone and dial Dirk's number, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. Between the two of us, Dirk had always been the one to pick up the phone, initiate the plan. I thought that maybe this was a kind of test. Who could hold out longer? If so, I'd spent a term waiting. I could last another day. To pass time, I bundled myself up and went for a walk. Instead of turning towards the main road, which was my first inclination, I headed the other way and followed a side road I hadn't been down in years. I'd remembered the side road as a crescent that met up with the main road, but it turned out I was wrong. The lamps became sparser, the houses grew smaller, and the street curled into a cul-de-sac surrounded by woods. I hesitated, then kept going. The trees were dispersed in such a way that I could pass between the trunks, but only by contorting myself. The ground was covered in thick and gnarled roots. Between some of the roots were semi-frozen puddles, and when I tapped the surface with the soles of my boots, the layer of ice cracked into shards and sank into the marshy liquid beneath. The further I went in, the darker and thicker the woods grew. Just as I was wondering whether I should or even could find my way back, I heard cars gliding over asphalt. Headlights sliced through the branches. A few more steps and I was standing on the side of the main road, 2 minutes from my street. On Christmas morning, I was woken twice. At 7, I heard the garage door open, a motor start, and tires crunch down the driveway. I fell back asleep. At 10 o'clock, it was a clash of baking trays, the buzz of an oven timer, and my mother knocking on my bedroom door. Yes, I said. She opened it a crack, letting in the buttery smell of rising pie crust. Heading off shortly. Sure you won't come? I rubbed my eyes and sat up in bed. Thanks, but I'd probably be leaving halfway through for Dirk's, so I'd prefer not. Well, you're always welcome if you change your mind. When I heard the front door close, I got out of bed and through the bedroom window watched my mother cross the street holding a foil-covered ceramic tray. It had snowed through the night, light, dry snow. It was piled up on bare branches, eaves troughs, mailboxes, doorsteps, curbs, side view mirrors, windshields, and bumpers. The lawns and roads were transformed into woolly white carpets. I couldn't just wait in bed, so I got up and walked around the house, tapping my fingers along the counters, cupboards, fridge door, the lid of the piano. At noon, I went back upstairs, stripped off my pajamas, and rinsed myself in the shower. I thought of putting together a lunch from last night's leftovers, but ate a bowl of breakfast instead. The next time I looked at the clock, it was 1:30. I figured I had a couple hours to kill. If I didn't hear from Dirk by 3:30, I would call him to see if everything was all right. In the meantime, I did my usual thing, practice. Schubert and Rachmaninoff, back to the top, again and again, or I'd never make it to Carnegie Hall. At around 3 o'clock, it began to snow again. Fat flakes, singles, and pairs that rotated on shared axes, bedding lightly on the ground. The next time I looked up, it was a solid curtain, opening and closing in a mesmerizing whiteout. 3:30, 4 o'clock, 4:15. I was anxious. I wondered if something had happened to his flight, a delay or cancellation, a misconnection, something on the drive home from Schiphol. I inhaled and exhaled. Just call, Jan. Just call. Just then, the phone in the kitchen started ringing. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I cleared my throat. Jan speaking, I said. Dirk speaking, he said, deadpan. Motherfucker, I said, feeling a flush of relief. You left it late. Dirk ignored this. Without prompting, he unleashed a monologue about his last 4 months. Classes, the campus at large, trips to the city, all the friends he was making, his roommate from California, Drew. Everything going swimmingly. That's good, I said. Really glad. I'm glad I could get all this information from you in one handy package. Have you saved me any truffles? Whoa, old man in a hurry, he said. What about you? What's up with you? Everything he told me, I repeated back to him in some way. How I had made a few friends myself, what their names were, how a few of us were planning our own trip to some city, which was an idea that somebody had floated and nobody had followed up on. That's good, Jan, he said, that's good. For a second, the line went quiet. I felt he was going to say something, but he didn't. Dirk? Yes? So what time should I come over? Again, the line went quiet. I heard voices on Dirk's end. Is that the fan? I said. No, Dirk said. My parents are on vacation this year. So if they're not in Den Bosch, neither am I. No, I frowned. I wasn't getting it. No, Dirk said. I'm calling for my girlfriend, Donna's. The Koches. I took a second. Are the Koches like the Zoetmulders, Dirk? Are you across the street? I can probably see you through the window. No, Dirk said. I'm at the Koches in Annapolis, in Maryland, America. You're serious? I said, unable to stop myself. Obviously, Dirk was serious. He'd been serious from our hellos. Yeah, he said. Sorry I didn't call earlier. Well, I said, trying to recover, it's no problem. It's pretty hectic being home, actually. I've barely had time to see my parents with all this work and practicing, and so that's good, Dirk said. Good to be busy. Yeah, I said, absolutely. Another drop in the line. I heard raised voices on his end, a harsh dissonance, followed by a group of people laughing. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. Right, I said. So are you coming this break at all? Well, actually, my parents will be coming to see me after New Year's. We'll be spending a few days in New York City to round things off. Wow, I said, amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I haven't told my parents, but Don is probably going to come along. Dirk's hand muffled the receiver. Then he was back. Yeah, anyways, Jan, so this is long distance. So, oh, right, of course, I said, can I give you a ring this term? At my dorm? He recited the digits. I wrote them down. Cool, great. Merry Christmas, Jan. You too, Dirk.
Such a contrast with the previous Christmas.
Brutal.
And those are the two Christmases in the book. Do you think it would have been possible for Dirk to narrate this story at all from his side?
Well, I mean, one of the things I really like to do is I'd like to rewrite this entire story from Dirk's perspective because, well, for many reasons. And one of the reasons that comes to mind right now is because readers' reactions to Dirk were split. And everyone reacted to him. Some thought he was just an asshole. I mean, a straight, rotten to the core asshole, a user, terrible person. Other people loved Dirk and could understand why Jan was so attracted to him. I mean, I love Dirk. Does he treat Jan extremely harshly? Absolutely. But it's possible Jan had something to do with that. Jan just doesn't remember or chooses not to say. I don't know. But Dirk, first of all, you gotta love all your characters. And second of all, it seemed to me apparent that he was lovable. But for that reason, because he was such a divisive figure, yes, I'd love to write things from his perspective. I'd love to write it completely differently. And I have some plans for it, but no, that's not my next project. But absolutely, I'd love to write it from his perspective, and it could be, because he would tell a very different story, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I saw the kind of problems, I suppose, with him that, people might say, oh, he's not a great character. And it's interesting, it's from Jan's perspective, but you can see where these influences have come in and how his character has been formed. One of the things I have considered asking is how much of an effect did Dirk's parents have on him? I don't know if that's a relevant question to ask.
You create a character, if you love that character sufficiently, and Dirk's such a main character, even if you haven't necessarily given it a thought, it's there. That's a real person, and you can imagine, you can speculate. In the earlier scene that I read, you could see that Dirk's mother was totally indulgent towards Dirk. Totally indulgent. And there was nothing that Dirk did. I mean, he shot rainbows to his mother. So that's the best way I can put it. And I think that mattered because Jan's parents were, I would say, carbon neutral in Jan's life. And they didn't support him. They did not support him. They were good parents in many ways. They did not ingratiate themselves in his life the way that Dirk's parents, or Dirk's mother especially, seems to. There was nothing that Dirk wasn't allowed to do. He didn't fear repercussions. He didn't fear recriminations. He didn't fear shame from his parents. And that's why he's completely free soul. And lovable, I would say. So yeah, his parents had a huge deal to do with his upbringing. I think Freud said something along the lines of somebody who's entirely confident in their mother's love can do no wrong. That's Dirk, for sure.
Well, yeah, talking about parents, I thought it was quite significant and interesting. Going back to that, the fact of the dialogue that we talked about earlier, that it's actually Dirk's mother who's the first person you give dialogue to, and that she is introducing Jan to the family effectively, welcoming him. I thought that was interesting, the role she had there, that led me to that question.
That's extremely sharp. Again, that's not something I intended, but that happens all over a story. And just because it's not intended doesn't mean it doesn't go along well with the story, as you're pointing out, that his mother is his echo in many ways. And the first voice you hear that's not Dirk's voice is an echo of Dirk's voice, and that's very, very in keeping with Jan's experience.
Mm-hmm. So we'll give her name. I think that's important. How important to you was Lena's inclusion in the story?
The way I structured it is Lena's, speaking of echoes and doubles and seconds and contrasts, these are all things that are important in music. They're definitely at the foremost of my thought when I was structuring this book. Lena's a bit like Lisa, the same thing, but something parallel, an echo of that earlier thing that happens between Jan, Dirk, and Lisa happens between Jan, Dirk, and Lena. And so to take the story objectively, she's extremely important in Jan's life. She's critical to his success. She's critical to his ability to move past Dirk as much as he's able to. But again, the story's in first person. And in first person, in Jan's mind, to Jan, there's very little room in his life for anyone who's not Dirk. Very little. And Lena's subject to that.
Yeah, I did kind of see them as the same person. I think how you read them, there's not so much detail about them. You do get more detail about Lena, but I don't know, they are kind of secondary, I think.
They're definitely secondary to Jan, as much as that, that's tragic. That's the tragedy of the book. He just cannot let drop this love that was so intense. The number of people who I know personally, the number of people I've heard from who say, I had a friendship just like this, I had a friend just like this, I don't speak to that friend anymore. It's because the intensity is so great and that time of life is so formative that it's no wonder that you have difficulty finding a love as fulfilling after you've had that first love, whether or not it's called a first love, whether it's called a best friendship, however you want to phrase it. And that's Lena's story vis-a-vis Jan in this book. Certainly. And the fact that they're a little indistinguishable, start with the letter L, 2 syllables, 4 letters, that's intentional, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't see that, but yeah, now you say it, I'm going to have to think of that more. So you've got the use of this, I suppose, musical tinnitus almost, this kind of music that goes in Jan's mind. Where did the idea of using this kind of mental and emotional turmoil that's enough to cause a kind of physical sickness come from?
Well, it came from 2 places. One is my friend Jan, who I mentioned earlier in this interview. He has tinnitus. And I knew him before he had it, and now I know him during his time with it. I saw him visit all kinds of specialists, go to New York, try all kinds of treatment. It's awful. It is just awful. And for something, at least in my opinion, to work symbolically, it has to work literally as well. And symbolically, it made a lot of sense that this musician couldn't get rid of the second music or the second noise in his head. But I also was able to see how devastating it can be for any kind of person. So that's where the idea came from. Again, I try to, in this case, I might have made it up if it hadn't been real, but fortunately for me, as a person who likes to work with a lot of reality, I saw it firsthand. And I think when you're mining or observing or basically, in a literary sense, abusing your friends and acquaintances, you start to look at them as characters and you start to look at their tribulations in a symbolic sense. You start to mine them. You start to see poetry in everyday life. Yeah, that's how that came to be in the pages of the story from life.
Mm-hmm. So moving on entirely, I really want to hear this. What's next?
So I don't want to speak too much about it because I previously thought one thing was next. I started it, I got well into it, and then I started something completely different. So I've just recently finished a manuscript, but I mean recently, like 2 days ago. And what I will say about it is that it takes a lot of what we had spoken about at the beginning of this interview regarding the PhD into fictional form. Specifically, what I learned about representations of witness and indirect witness experience, I've tried to take that into a novel myself. So I know I'm speaking very vaguely, but what I'm trying to say is it's a story about a person who lived through the war It's how they represent it to themselves and to others. It's how others react to this person. And it comes, like many stories in novels, at a critical point in this person's life, in the end of this person's life. So I know I'm being rather vague. I can say it's also short. And that it follows what I've always been interested in, which is how does a story get transmitted through art? How does a story get told in fiction? You can drill me, but I'm going to be defensive.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, especially you say you finished it 2 days ago, so that's fair enough. I'll leave it with you. But yeah, I hope this goes somewhere. It's different, but given School of Velocity, I'm very intrigued to see where this is going to go.
That's very kind, and I hope it goes somewhere too. I mean, it matters to me, just like the PhD mattered to me. Yeah, subject matters, at least to me.
Someone pick it up when it's all done and it's edited. Pick it up.
Thank you.
So, listeners, School of Velocity, published by Pushkin Press, as we said, is available to purchase, and links are in the description. If you have enjoyed this conversation, do subscribe to the podcast for future episodes, and as before, if you want to contact the show, my email address is in the description. Eric, this has been a lot of fun, if I can use that word. This has been really interesting, and hearing all the intricacy things. I often say this, but I'm going to have to go back and read those bits again and see them. And yeah, please do get that novel done. That would be amazing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, and thank you for your very perceptive reading. I mean, the book just wants readers who are as perceptive and as invested as you. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Join me on Monday the 23rd of November, when I will be talking to Tammy Huff, author of A More Perfect Union. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 26, was recorded on the 13th of October and published on the 9th of November 2020. Music and production by Charlie Place.